In the city of Lagos, lived a young woman named Amara Okafor. She had always been the kind of person who preferred to stay indoors, avoiding basic interactions while reading one of the many books that her father had brought home when returning from his travels. But right now, she works in a small restaurant, trying to keep her balance as she maneuvered through the crowd of people with plates on her hands and a strained smile on her face. She worked as a waitress at a small roadside restaurant, and she was a hard worker. Always on time and ready to do whatever work was thrown her way with the same smile on her face. She would attend to customers with a friendly, accommodating attitude that made her a favorite among many. Every day, she would go back home with her cheeks aching from having to keep up that attitude. But it was all fake, because deep inside, Amara was tired. Tired of the hard life, tired of poverty, tired of rejection, and just tired of life in general. Every day, she got back late at night and was exhausted from the day's work. Barely having any time to do anything for herself, she would simply prepare for the evening and the next day and then fall asleep thinking about her life. It hadn't always been like this. But when her father died and her mother fell sick, she knew that she had to do something. With both the breadwinners unavailable, she had to pick up the slack and take care of things. Especially since Chitty, her younger brother, was still in school and needed his school fees to be paid. But even with all her years of hard work, the debts were piling up like a mountain. Every single day, she knew that she had to do better, but she was doing her best, and that thought made her want to cry every time it crossed her mind. Every night before sleeping, while her mind swirled with thoughts about how she couldn't wait for things to get better, she always had it in mind that she was meant for greater things than the fake smiles coming from customers she served in the small restaurant where she worked. One particularly rainy evening, Amara, closing her eyes, sighed heavily as she sat down on a stool, leaning her head on a wall. She had been busy all day running around for hours. Finally, she got the chance to rest a little as the rush of day had slowed down. Amara was exhausted and wished she could leave at that very moment, go home and rest. But then the thought of having to struggle through Lagos traffic and public transportation weakened her even more. Her quiet thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of the front door of the restaurant open. She groaned inwardly and sighed as she prepared herself to greet the new customer. She was not the only waitress who worked in the restaurant, but much was always expected of her because of how popular she was at the restaurant. This caused the other workers to almost never attend to any customer unless of course they were assigned specially to them. This left her with even more responsibilities. Sometimes, Amara hated the fact that she was loved too much due to her amiable personality. As she walked over to the gentleman by the door, she put on her signature smile as usual. After all, that was what had kept her in this job till now. As she walked up to the customer, she assessed him and recognized that he was a regular. He mostly came in the evenings, and would always sit at a table in the corner. The same table Amara was leading him to now. Once seated, he would glance up at her with the same dark eyes and look he always gave her before ordering his usual jollof rice without meat and water. Amara took his orders with a smile and left them to go get his food. The man was one who never talked much. He always comes in alone for his meals. Unknown to Amara, he was always quietly being observant, taking notice of things about her. How she was always up and attending to different customers when there was a rush at the restaurant. How he barely saw her eat while at work, yet she would on rare occasions share her little portion of food with a hungry child who always comes around begging for food at the entrance of the restaurant. How she sometimes secretly wiped away her tears when she thought no one was looking. One night, after a full day's work and stress, Amara left at the close of work. As she was about to get to the bus stop where she would struggle for a bus to begin her journey home, she heard some footsteps behind her. Trained to be very observant, she glanced to see her back, and there she saw the gentleman who always ordered jollof rice and water without meat at the restaurant walking in her direction. Her heart sped up a bit. She was about hastening her speed when she heard him call out her name. Her heart jumped as she wondered what the quiet man wanted from her. She contemplated running but decided against it so as not to appear rude, and she was curious to know what this was all about. As he got close to Amara, she stepped back a bit. "Good evening," she greeted without adding the usual sir the way she usually would if she had met him at the restaurant. "Yes, good evening, Amara. Thank you for waiting," he said. Amara paused a bit before saying, "You know my name?" It wasn't a question but rather a statement. Amara nodded. "What can I do for you, sir?" she asked as she began to feel the burning of her feet from standing all day long. The man opened his mouth softly and said, "Amara, I want to marry you." There was a moment of silence before Amara could speak up as she couldn't believe her ears. "Excuse me," she said with a confused expression. Maybe she hadn't heard him well. "I said I want to marry you, Amara," he repeated. She couldn't believe her ears. "You want to marry me? But I don't even know you," she said in reply, a little confused, a worried laugh on her face. At that moment, she was thankful that they were both under a working streetlight, as she believed the gentleman in front of her must be mad. "Do you know my name?" he asked. "I told you before. Remember? A lot of customers tell me their names. I can't possibly remember all of them, so I don't remember yours," she said in an almost snippy tone. "My name is Cato. Mr. Cato." "Well, Mr. Cato, I need to be heading home as I'm very tired and it's late," Amara said. She began to walk away but stopped when she heard his voice again. "I can help you, you know? You just need to marry me," he said. "But I don't even know you," Amara said, almost throwing her hands up to match the exasperation she was sure was present in her voice. "Who marries someone they don't even know?" she asked tiredly. "But I know you," the man said quietly. "Your mother's hospital bills, your debts, you, yourself. Everything, I will take care of. Just say yes." Amara instinctively took a step backwards when she heard him say that. "How did you know about all of that? I never told you? Have you been following me or something?" Amara asked quietly as she felt her legs tense as if preparing to break out into a run at any moment. She was now officially scared of this man. Mr. Cato seemed to notice the change in her demeanor as he replied, "Yes, you didn't, but I once overheard you talking about it with someone." He almost seemed nervous himself. Amara thought about what he had just said. She had rarely ever talked about her problems with someone in the restaurant, but she vaguely remembered opening up to a coworker she was friendly with at the restaurant about her financial situation on one of her really bad days, but she couldn't remember Mr. Cato being present or close enough to have heard their conversation. "And how do you intend to do that?" she asked warily, still keeping a reasonable amount of distance between them. "I have money. A lot of it, and I can help you out," he repeated. "Why?" Amara asked. "Why would you want to do that for someone you basically do not know?" "I have my reasons," he said. Amara for a few minutes thought about what Cato had just said. She saw it as a good idea, but how could she marry a stranger? Amara said after a few minutes' silence, before turning around and walking away to her bus stop as quickly as she could. But she did. She did marry a stranger. And as they stood in that quiet room, taking their vows, Amara wondered how she could have allowed herself to have ended up in this kind of situation. Cato never relented in trying to convince Amara to marry him from that first day he had asked her to. He began to get closer to Amara whenever he came in for a meal at the restaurant, which she entertained only out of courtesy. As time passed, he would wait outside until the restaurant closed to be able to talk to her. He was incredibly persistent with his requests that Amara eventually agreed to consider marrying him on two conditions. He would provide her with the evidence of his wealth, and he would give her the reassurance of not being a bad guy. The first condition he provided without a problem. He showed her a series of legal documents of his wealth. Then he took her personally to meet the DPO of his area for a discussion. He equally, for her peace of mind, gave her the DPO's phone number, telling her that she could reach out to him anytime she felt threatened. On the wedding day, in the quiet courthouse, she noticed that none of his family members were present except 3 of his friends. Her brothers and their sick mother, whose eyes gleamed with tears of joy at seeing their sister getting married to the love of her life, as she claimed, were in attendance. She had lied to them. She had deceived them all about having known Mr. Cato for years. After signing the marriage papers, taking photos, and saying goodbye to her family, Cato, as he had told her was his first name, handed her a small golden key which was apparently the key to their new home. He told her that the entire house was free and at her disposal, but warned, "There is one door in the house you must never open. Promise me you won't go there." Amara hesitated. What was in there that he didn't want her to know about? She agreed to mind her business. The day after the wedding, Amara had just finished packing her things at her parents' house when Cato's driver arrived to pick her up in a sleek black car. She said a tearful goodbye to her family but promised to come by to visit and check on her mother, whose health would begin to recover soon. The drive took her far from the noisy streets, the ones that had been her home for years, to a private island surrounded by water. There on the island stood a golden mansion, shining like the sun. Amara couldn't hold her shock as her mouth dropped open in amazement. The interior was just as beautiful as the exterior. There were massive chandeliers, marble floors, servants in uniforms all around the house. During their brief courtship after Amara met with Kato a few times, she couldn't help but ask him who he really was. His only response was, "In time, you will get to know Amara." Time passed and Amara settled into the routine of her new life. She no longer had to work long grueling hours in the restaurant but rather spent her time reading and learning as she had started a postgraduate program in a top university to further her education. She also visited her family often and was pleased to see her brothers progressing well in school and her mother healing well from her illness. As for Kato, he hadn't changed, he was still as quiet as ever. But she had come to learn that he was kind and a gentleman. He never raised his voice or fought with her. But he was mysterious, no friends, no family visits, and he mostly disappeared at midnight. She had learned to mind her business as she was happy with all he had given her, but yet very curious about him. One night, curiosity won her over and she decided to follow him quietly as he walked away as usual before coming back to her for the rest of the night. Lost in her thoughts, she lost him in a dark hallway, but after wandering around quietly, she stumbled across the door, the one that was always locked. The one he had asked her to promise never to open or enter. She had kept her promise so far, but today, her curiosity seemed to be winning. Her heart pounded as she stared at the door as her fingers tightened around the golden key she held in her hands. She had made it a habit to carry it everywhere and had wondered if that key would open this door as it did every other door in the house. Her hands moved towards the door before she realized it and she slowly turned the key. The door creaked and as it opened wider, she could get a better view of the room. It was huge inside and the walls were lined with candles. Above the candles laid old portraits and as she looked closely, she realized that they were all of her husband, Kato. All different but still of the same face, painted in different centuries but the same face with the same dark eyes that had stared at her so many times. Amara felt her heart begin to pound louder as she noticed ancient-looking books, all written in languages she didn't know or understand. She saw documents of companies, land, banks, over 200 years old, all owned by him. Amara couldn't make sense of anything that was happening but only of the thought that this was the worst thing to see in the dark. Lots of candle light lay at the center of the room. Amara wasn't even sure how she had missed it in the first place because in front of her lay a coffin. A glass coffin. Amara had never seen one before. Shaken out of her shock, Amara realized that was the least of her problems as she realized that there was a body inside of the coffin, and as she unconsciously moved closer to get a good look, fear gripped her. She saw inside the coffin what seemed to be a woman sleeping, or could she be dead? Amara didn't have an idea of anything at that point, but what she did know without a fact was that the woman in the coffin looked exactly like her. She had seen her own face enough times to know that woman in the coffin had her face. Amara's mind began to go wild with questions and thoughts about what she was seeing. Feeling a moment of dizziness, she reached out to the first thing within her grasp for stability. As her fingers touched the cold, hard glass of the coffin, she jerked backwards as if the coffin had burnt her. She could barely hear anything because of the pounding of her heart, but she definitely knew that she needed to get out of that room and away from that coffin as fast as possible. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her and Amara felt her whole body tense up in terror. She slowly turned around to see Kato walk into the room. There was no rush in his steps, no anger in his eyes. He slowly opened his mouth to speak. "I am not who you think I am," he said quietly. Amara didn't respond. She couldn't say a word. She was too stricken with fear to talk. Kato continued. "My real name is Kato Obiora. I was born over 250 years ago and I was once a prince. But when my kingdom faced destruction, I had to do something to save it. And so, I made a pact with a river goddess. In exchange for saving my people, I was given a long life, wealth and power. But the price," he said, his voice barely a whisper as he looked at her sadly, "was loneliness." He walked towards the glass coffin. "That woman," he said, lightly caressing the glass as he looked down at the woman in the coffin with what Amara could tell were eyes filled with sadness, "was my wife and she died 200 years ago. You looked exactly like her. You are her reincarnation," he said, not even looking up at Amara but still looking down at who Amara had learnt was his wife. Amara stepped back, trembling. So, you only married me because I looked like her? Amara asked in an equally trembling voice. Kato shook his head and Amara was surprised to see tears glistening in his eyes as he looked up at her. The man she had come to know barely ever showed any emotions, but here he was now, crying in front of her.
No.
I married you because I can only die when my heart loves and is loved back. I am tired, Amara. I don't want to live forever anymore, he said, his voice breaking at the end. What did he mean when he is loved back? That woman in the coffin was his wife, and from his behavior, Amara could tell that he loved her dearly. Kato, upon noticing Amara's gaze on the coffin, smiled between his tears and followed her gaze. Like you, we only got married because she needed help with her life and family, he said quietly, glancing up at Amara before looking back down. But I had been in love with her, and fell even more in love after we got married. She never came to love me though, he finished, his voice coated with sadness. Amara said nothing in response. He had answered her question, but what was she to say? This situation was unbelievable. Kato looked around and grabbed a small silver knife that lay on a table and walked towards Amara. Amara felt her heart drop as she looked at the knife in his hands.
She wanted to cry.
Is this how it would end for her? She knew that the dream of the world she had been living in was too good to be true and that she should have never married someone she barely knew in the first place. She almost screamed in frustration as she felt the pain of losing the life she had barely gotten back together, a life that she had barely started living, being ripped away from her just like that. But he had promised her that he would never hurt her and she was almost believing him, so why would he want to hurt her now with the knife in his hands? She began to step back, away from Kato. You promised you wouldn't hurt me, she screamed at him. Her voice was shaky as she was on the verge of tears. Kato paused in his movements as his eyes softened a little. He looked down at the knife in his hands and took half a step back. What? No, I would never, he said. He began to walk up to Amara again, and this time, she was stuck in a place as the fear in her was just too much. When he reached her, he leaned down and gently grabbed her hand before placing the knife in her hand. His hands were shaking as he clasped them around hers as he held them tight but not enough to hurt her before saying, If you love me, stay, but if you fear me, end it now with the knife in your hands. Amara's hands shook and tears rolled down her face. She didn't know if she loved him or not. She didn't even know him. But even through her tears, she remembered how he had cared for her mother, paid her brother's school fees, and sat beside her when she cried. He had never shouted at her, never hurt her. So how could she hurt him now? She dropped the knife and stared hard at Kato. She might not love him, but she could learn to. With shaky fingers, she reached up and held his face, stirring deeply into it. She whispered, I will stay. Not because I have to, but because I want to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kato closed his eyes, and for the first time in 250 years his heart beat like a human again. The glass coffin behind them cracked. The past faded, and a new life began between them. Moral lessons. Firstly, please do not marry someone you barely know. It might have ended well for Amara, but life is not always a bed of roses, especially life. Secondly, true love is not about wealth, but about sacrifice. Some people are not looking for beauty or power, just someone who sees them for who they are.
Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this beautiful story, please drop a like on the video and leave a comment on your favorite part of the story, moral lessons, and so on your notification bell so that you can get notified anytime a new and interesting video is released. If you believe in second chances, if you believe scars can become symbols of strength, share this story. Let it reach someone who's still fighting their past. Subscribe to my channel, Folktales by Queen Mother, for more real African stories that inspire, transform, and live forever in your heart. Please be rest assured that if you support me by liking, commenting, and subscribing to my channel, you will always stay motivated. It has not been easy getting here, but I really appreciate all of you who always watch my videos to the end. It's a lot of hard work, days of sleepless nights before one of these videos you watch on this channel is produced. I am counting on your support always to take this channel to the top. Thank you once again for your unwavering love and support. God bless you all.